Most people who don't ride think they understand why riders do it. Speed, freedom, rebellion, a certain kind of recklessness dressed up as personality. And the ones who do ride, the new ones, the ones still in their first 2 years, they sometimes believe that too. But then you talk to someone who has been riding for 23 years, 31 years, someone who has owned 12 bikes and buried 2 riding partners, and still, every single Saturday morning, rolls the bike out before the neighborhood wakes up. And the speed thing? It barely comes up. Something else did. Something they can't always name right away. Something that took most of them years to even recognize was happening. You can spot a long-term rider before they say a single word. They don't rush to the bike. They walk around it first. A hand on the tank. A quick glance at the tires they've already checked 100 times. They swing a leg over with the kind of ease that has nothing to do with confidence and everything to do with repetition. They know exactly which way to lean into a particular curve on a road they've run for a decade. Not because they memorized it, because their body did. They ride in rain and still come home smiling, not because they enjoyed being wet, because they were still present for all of it. They pass a newer rider on a sport bike going 30 over and feel nothing except a distant memory of being that person. They pull over at the same overlook they've stopped at for 15 years and sit there longer than they need to, not taking a photo, just sitting. And to anyone watching from outside, especially in a culture obsessed with upgrades, new models, faster everything, it probably looks like the most boring thing a person could do on a Saturday. But psychologists who study what they call embodied identity, the way long-term physical practices reshape who we are, found something the motorcycle world almost never talks about openly. People who stay with riding for decades aren't chasing the original feeling anymore. They're protecting something they built. There's a man named David, 51 years old, from Knoxville, Tennessee. He manages a regional distribution center. 70 employees, endless logistics, decisions that compound before lunch. He started riding at 29 after his father died and left him a 1987 Honda Shadow in the garage of a house David had to help sell. He almost didn't keep it. He had no real reason to. He rode it once around the block, came back in, sat in the driveway for 40 minutes. He told his wife that night something strange had happened, that for the first time in months, he hadn't thought about any of it, the grief, the estate paperwork, the things left unsaid. For about 20 minutes on that street, his mind had nothing to do except ride. He's been riding for 22 years now. The Shadow is long gone. He's on his 4th bike. But here's what David says when you ask him why he still rides. It's the only place where I am fully responsible for the next 10 seconds. Nothing else. Just the next 10 seconds. That's not an answer about motorcycles. That's an answer about a nervous system that finally found somewhere to land. Neuroscientist Stefan Kreibig spent years studying what happens in the brain during activities that demand what researchers call present-moment attentional marrowing, the kind of focus that riding requires, where a lapse in attention has immediate physical consequences, produces a measurable reduction in activity in the default mode network. That's the part of the brain responsible for rumination, regret, anxious future building. In plain terms, you cannot catastrophize about your marriage, your finances, or the conversation you should have had last Tuesday when you were leaning through a blind corner at 50 miles an hour. The bike forces you to be nowhere else, and over years, something deeper happens. Psychiatrist Dr. Bessel van de Kolk, who spent decades studying how humans regulate their nervous systems, found that rhythmic physical activities, especially ones that demand full physical engagement, gradually retrain how the body responds to stress. They don't just manage anxiety, they restructure it. Long-term riders aren't just people who enjoy motorcycles. Their nervous systems have been slowly, quietly reorganized by 2 decades of required presence. At some point, and most riders can't name exactly when it happened, the riding stops being something they do. It becomes part of who they are. Psychologists call this activity-based identity integration. The practice stops being separate from the self. It gets folded in. When long-term riders talk about a season they couldn't ride, an injury, a move, a rough stretch of life, they don't say they missed it like a hobby. They describe it the way people describe losing a version of themselves, because that's what it is. And this is where the comparison to newer riders becomes stark. Newer riders often talk about the machine, the torque, the ergonomics, the next upgrade. Long-term riders talk about roads, seasons, who they were the last time they ran this particular route. The motorcycle became a vehicle for something it was never advertised to do. It became a container for selfhood. But here's the part the motorcycle community is slower to say out loud. There are seasons in every long-term rider's life where they almost stopped. An injury that scared them, a close call that sat too heavy, a partner who issued an ultimatum. A year where the cost of everything, bikes, gear, insurance, time, stopped making sense to justify. Staying through those seasons wasn't passion. Passion is easy. Passion is what gets people into the garage on a warm April afternoon. What kept long-term riders through the difficult seasons was something quieter, harder to explain at a dinner table. A knowledge that who they are without riding is a smaller, louder, more restless person. And most of them eventually chose the larger version. The Harvard Study of Adult Development, the longest-running study on human well-being ever conducted, found that what protects people psychologically across a lifetime isn't achievement or wealth or even relationships alone. It's having reliable anchors, practices, places, and habits that persist across the chaos of a life. Things that remain consistent when almost everything else changes. For long-term riders, the motorcycle is one of those anchors, not because the bike is special, because the ritual is. The same pre-ride check, the same first minute of warmth on the engine, the same specific weight of full gear in summer heat before the air finally hits. The body remembers all of it, and a body that remembers is a body that feels at home. And here's what makes that different from any other hobby. You can't half-do it. You can scroll your phone while watching TV. You can cook dinner while mentally rehearsing an argument. Riding won't allow that. It demands everything. Your eyes, your hands, your weight distribution, your timing. The bike collects the whole of you every single time. That total claim on attention is the gift most long-term riders never expected when they started. In a world that has gotten faster, louder, and more anxious than any generation before this one, something that requires all of you and gives you back to yourself in return isn't a hobby, it's medicine. So no, if you've been riding for 20+ years, it isn't because you still love motorcycles the way you loved them at the start. It's because something happened between you and the road across 2 decades that modern culture doesn't have clean language for. You got quieter on the bike as the world got louder. You got more patient with the machine as you ran out of patience everywhere else. You learned that presence is a skill, not a mood, and the bike taught you that first. The original spark? That probably changed, maybe faded, maybe transformed into something so different you wouldn't recognize it next to that first ride. But what replaced it is steadier, less glamorous, more yours. Not performance, not image, not the sound of the exhaust or the look of the tank in the garage light, just you, a road, and 20 years of knowing exactly who shows up when everything else gets stripped away. That's not about the motorcycle. That never was. How long have you been riding, and what does the bike still give you that nothing else does? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one.